let's talk about something that's reshaping the way entertainment gets made and consumed in 2025. Anti-woke isn't just a label anymore. It's a strategy, a genre, a business model built on provocation. And this video, it's a direct response to Clownfish TV's recent upload, Anti-Woke is the mainstream media now. Because while they're not wrong about how common the branding has become, we need to talk about how that popularity is changing what gets made and why. Because here's the truth. Anti-woke entertainment is not about story, it's about reaction. And in the current media landscape, pissing off Twitter is now part of the pitch deck. This isn't limited to film and TV anymore. Rolling Stone recently ran a piece about the rise of an anti-woke literary movement in Los Angeles, writers gathering in private salons to push back on millennial moral gatekeeping. They're publishing fiction not to challenge artistic norms, but to provoke a response. And whether you think it's brave or just edgy for edgy's sake, it speaks to something larger. That today, provocation is currency. And that brings us to Hollywood's latest signal fire, the upcoming Basic Instinct reboot. Joe Esterhazy is returning to write a new version for Amazon MGM Studios, a version marketed explicitly as anti-woke. Now, Basic Instinct was already controversial when it dropped in 1992. Queer-coded villains, weaponized sexuality, scenes that sparked real protests. So what does anti-woke even mean in this context? Are they just doubling down or slapping on a label to get clicks? Because you can't make an erotic thriller woke without gutting the genre. These films rely on ambiguity and danger. Sanitizing that means losing the edge. And Esterhazy isn't selling narrative here. He's selling rebellion. And he's not alone. We've seen this strategy before. Tim Allen's Last Man Standing ran for 9 seasons and became a cultural flashpoint, not just for its humor, but for its politics. The show actively poked fun at 2010s era identity politics, often weaving conservative talking points into punchlines. That was part of its appeal to a niche audience, viewers who felt mainstream sitcoms had become too sanitized or politically skewed. But compare that to Allen's earlier hit Home Improvement. Back in the 90s, Tim the Toolman Taylor was the everydad, grunting through DIY projects, navigating parenting with slapstick charm, and steering clear of overt politics. It was a broadly appealing sitcom because it didn't take sides. It made jokes about masculinity, family, and suburban quirks, not political ideology. Last Man Standing, on the other hand, planted its flag in the culture war, and while it earned strong ratings for a time, it eventually became a time capsule, one tethered to the social anxieties of a decade now behind us. And when ABC canceled it in 2017, fans cried foul. But as Vox pointed out, the real reason was more practical. The show's audience skewed older, and unless you're pulling Big Bang Theory numbers, it doesn't make financial sense to keep a show like that going beyond season 5. ABC was shifting away from Friday night comedies, and Last Man Standing, despite solid ratings, wasn't built for long-term cultural relevance. Compare that to Modern Family, which was also running on ABC at the time. It appealed to both young and old, and at one point, to both sides of the political spectrum. Barack Obama and Mitt Romney, two men who agreed on almost nothing, both said their favorite TV show was Modern Family. Obama, a staunch Democrat, Mitt Romney, a big business Republican. That's how you build mainstream culture, by connecting across divides, not by antagonizing one side for the enjoyment of the other. But that kind of universal resonance is hard to engineer, especially when entertainment becomes a vehicle for reaction rather than reflection. When shows are built around mocking a specific moment in time or a fleeting cultural controversy, they risk becoming time capsules, artifacts of outrage that don't evolve as the conversation moves on. And that's not just a sitcom problem, it's a genre-wide problem. Look back at Cold War cinema. Monster movies and alien invasions in the 1950s reflected real-world nuclear anxiety. They weren't just campy, they were cathartic. The Day the Earth Stood Still from 1951, the original, spoke to global panic. Klaatu wasn't just a visitor, he was a warning. Then came the 2008 reboot. Swap nuclear war for climate collapse. Swap eerie allegory for forgettable CG. The emotional urgency didn't translate because the original worked because of its era. Strip away the timestamp, and the message falls flat. The same goes for high school movies. Brat Pack staples like 16 Candles, Pretty in Pink, and The Breakfast Club all reflected 80s teen culture. The angst was authentic for that generation. But then you get Fast Times at Ridgemont High, which wasn't a Brat Pack film, but nailed the decade's hormonal chaos. Phoebe Cates stepping out of the pool to Moving in Stereo by the Cars? Iconic. That one scene alone turned a lot of boys into men. But most people forget the movie also dealt with teen pregnancy, abortion, and burnout. The nuance gets buried under nostalgia. Jump to Mean Girls in 2004. A completely different landscape. Social strategy replaced rebellion. Reputation mattered more than rebellion. And for anyone who went to high school in the 2010s, that version of social dynamics felt far more accurate than anything the Brat Pack put on screen. 21 Jump Street took it a step further. Jonah Hill's nerd becomes popular. Channing Tatum's jock is out of touch. That inversion wasn't just for laughs. It was an admission. Culture evolves and archetypes expire. That's what makes South Park joining the Panderverse such a revealing case study. The special was instantly embraced by anti-woke YouTubers. They saw Cartman's multiverse version of Kathleen Kennedy and cheered. It was marketed as satire against Disney's progressive leanings. But here's what those channels missed. South Park was mocking them too. Kennedy's obsession with the Panderstone is powered by Cartman's hate mail. The outrage isn't just commentary, it's fuel. And Randy screaming, "It's all Kathleen Kennedy's fault." That's a direct jab at creators who've turned her into a scapegoat for every franchise misstep. Unlike Daily Wire content, which talks to its audience about their enemies, South Park talks to its audience about themselves. That's satire, that's risk, and that's why it works. Compare it to Lady Ballers, Daily Wire's comedy about trans athletes. Featuring Ted Cruz, Riley Gaines, Matt Walsh, and Ben Shapiro, it wasn't built to entertain. It was built to validate. And even The Critical Drinker, a staple in right-wing YouTube culture, couldn't give it a full pass. Mr. Birchum, an animated sitcom with Adam Carolla, was billed as quote-unquote too offensive for TV. Critics panned it, and fans barely engaged with it. Terror on the Prairie, starring Gina Carano after her Mandalorian exit, generated buzz from headlines, but not from the actual content. It vanished from conversation faster than it entered. And Am I Racist, a mockumentary starring Matt Walsh, tried to replicate Borat, but missed the nuance. Because Borat wasn't just built to provoke, it was built to reflect. Sacha Baron Cohen wasn't targeting one side of the culture war over the other. He was holding up a mirror to American society during the height of the war on terror, exposing how absurd and contradictory the national mood had become. The film didn't just poke fun at racism, it revealed how easily people would go along with xenophobia if it was wrapped in patriotism or fear. Remember, the police were called on Cohen multiple times during filming. One complaint? A Middle Eastern man driving an ice cream truck. That wasn't a punchline, that was the point. Borat blurred the line between comedy and confrontation. It made people uncomfortable because it showed them who they were when they thought no one was watching. Am I Racist, on the other hand, was designed to provoke a reaction from one side of the culture war. It wasn't satire, it was strategy. Walsh's goal wasn't to challenge his own audience, it was to reinforce their worldview. That's the difference. Borat made everyone squirm. Am I Racist made one side cheer and the other side rolled their eyes. And when satire only punches in one direction, it stops being satire. It becomes branding. That same mirror-holding satire extended to The Dictator, released in 2012, right in the middle of the Arab Spring. Cohen's character, General Aladdin, is a character of every Western stereotype about Middle Eastern dictators, but the film's sharpest moment comes in the helicopter scene where Aladdin and Nadal, played by Jason Mantzoukas, are speaking Arabic about a Porsche 911. Aladdin says 911, it's the best, referring to the car model, but the two American tourists misrepresent it as a reference to the September 11 attacks. Then it escalates. Aladdin casually mentions Bin Laden and Osama in separate lines, completely unrelated to terrorism, but the Americans hear those words and spiral into full paranoia. And just when the tension peaks, Nadal adjusts his back brace, a medical support strap, which the tourists mistake for a chest-mounted bomb. Aladdin and Nadal begin counting down from 5 in English, mimicking the sound of a crash, completely unaware of the panic they're causing. It's a brilliant gag, not because it's edgy, but because it exposes how deeply post 9/11 fear had conditioned Americans to associate Arabic speech, Middle Eastern names, and even medical devices with terrorism. And Cohen knew exactly what he was doing. The Dictator came out just 1 year after Osama bin Laden was killed by SEAL Team 6 in 2011. That timing wasn't accidental, it was commentary. The Dictator wasn't just mocking authoritarianism, it was mocking the West's reaction to it. And that's what separates real satire from partisan content. It doesn't just provoke, it reveals. But revelation only works once. Once the audience learns the trick, once the satire becomes recognizable, the edge dulls. That's why Bruno didn't land, and why Borat's subsequent movie films struggled to recapture the chaos of the original. Sacha Baron Cohen had become too famous. When he walked into a room, people didn't react, they posed. The anonymity was gone. The experiment was compromised. It's the same story with the Blair Witch Project. It wasn't the first found footage horror film. Cannibal Holocaust did it in 1980, and The Connection, directed by Shirley Clarke, used the format as early as 1961. But Blair Witch was the one that caught fire. Let's break that down. The Connection was the true trailblazer. It opened with the title card claiming the footage was assembled by a cameraman after the disappearance of a documentary filmmaker. It blurred the line between fiction and non-fiction, using jazz musicians and heroin addicts to explore exploitation, voyeurism, and authenticity. But like many pioneering works, it got buried by time and overshadowed by those who came later and elevated the genre into the mainstream. Then came Cannibal Holocaust. It didn't just use found footage, it weaponized it. The film was so convincing that director Ruggero Deodato was charged with murder. He had the actors sign contracts agreeing to disappear from public view for a full year after release to maintain the illusion. When authorities believed the deaths were real, Deodato had to break those contracts and bring the actors into court to prove they were alive. He even demonstrated how the infamous impalement scene was staged using a bicycle seat and a wooden spike. But Cannibal Holocaust never broke into the mainstream. It was banned in multiple countries and remains controversial, especially for its real animal killings, which many viewers refuse to watch out of principle. The Blair Witch Project, on the other hand, arrived in 1999, right as the internet was booming. The filmmakers built a fake website filled with missing person flyers, police reports, and interviews with quote-unquote locals. They listed the actors as deceased on IMDb. They blurred the line between fiction and reality in a way that felt immersive, viral, and participatory. So while The Connection pioneered the format and Cannibal Holocaust perfected the illusion, Blair Witch popularized it. It made found footage horror mainstream. It wasn't just a movie, it was a moment. That's what Provocation does best. It makes you look, but only the first time. You see it in gaming too. Whenever a game underperforms, it's labeled as woke. Whenever it succeeds, it's reclaimed as anti-woke, even if politics were never part of the equation. Take Stellar Blade. It was praised for its fan service and flashy combat. Meanwhile, Suicide Squad Killed the Justice League was mocked for pride flags and inclusive UI features. But let's be honest, Suicide Squad didn't flop because of a rainbow in the corner. It flopped because it was creatively bankrupt and a live service game released into a market that's completely burned out on live service mechanics. Gamers in 2025 aren't looking for grindy seasonal content. They want full experiences. So yes, it failed, but not for the reasons the culture war crowd insists. Then came Concord, a hero shooter launched for the PS5 and Windows in 2024. It sold so poorly that Sony shut it down within 2 weeks of release and issued full refunds. Predictably, pundits blame pronouns and quote-unquote wokeness, citing the game's inclusion of LGBTQ+ tags and one character using they-them pronouns. But again, Concord didn't fail because of pronouns. It failed because it was a hero shooter. And in 2024, if you're going to play a hero shooter, you're going to play Overwatch or Overwatch 2. I think they forced everyone to upgrade. And why? Because that's where your friends are. That's the problem with launching a multiplayer-only game in a saturated genre. If you're not backed by a massive IP or offering something radically new, you're dead on arrival. Concord had no brand recognition, no differentiating mechanics, and no reason for players to switch. It wasn't just a bad launch, it was a misread of the market. Compare that to Marvel Rivals, another hero shooter, but one that actually stood a chance. Why? Because it has the Marvel branding. You're not just picking a random character, you're picking Iron Man, Storm, Rocket Raccoon, Captain Marvel, yada yada yada. The game itself is new, but the heroes are familiar. That matters. Anytime there's a clone of Overwatch, Fortnite, or PUBG, those games tend to die as quickly as they come out, because players don't switch unless their friends switch. That's why Call of Duty dominated sales charts for so long over EA's Battlefield series. It wasn't just about gameplay, it was about network effects. Everyone was playing Call of Duty, so you did too. And that's the real lesson. Games don't fail because they're quote-unquote woke. They fail because they're irrelevant, because they don't offer anything new, because they don't understand their audience. And when pundits ignore that, they're not analyzing, they're just projecting. And then there's Hogwarts Legacy. The game was mired in controversy from the moment it was announced, largely due to J.K. Rowling's public statements about transgender issues. Activists called for boycotts, arguing that purchasing the game would indirectly support Rowling's views, but the game shattered sales records anyway, topping charts on Steam, Epic, and Amazon before it even officially launched. Right-wing culture warriors immediately claimed victory. They saw the backlash fail and took the game's success as proof that quote-unquote wokeness had lost. But here's what they missed. Hogwarts Legacy was always going to succeed. It's Harry Potter. It's tied to one of the most beloved franchises in modern pop culture. The IP alone guaranteed reach. And more importantly, most players weren't making political statements. They just wanted to explore Hogwarts. Most people aren't watching Outrage channels. They're just playing games. The truth is, these warriors on both sides are loud, but they aren't the majority. That disconnect between cultural battlegrounds and everyday audiences, that's what makes so much of quote-unquote anti-woke entertainment feel manufactured. It's not built to connect, it's just built to provoke. What do you think defines anti-woke entertainment today? Is it cultural rebellion or just branding? Have you seen media that genuinely engages with change or just copies nostalgia with a fist raised? Drop your thoughts below, let's talk about it. Because in 2025, provocation has become production. Outrage isn't just an aesthetic, it's a business model. And when that model starts to dictate what stories we tell, we lose something. Because provocation without purpose doesn't elevate, it just agitates. The entertainment that lasts, South Park, Modern Family, Borat, doesn't pick sides, it picks honesty. It challenges everyone. It holds up a mirror instead of throwing a punch. If anti-woke content only works when it's dunking on someone, then it's not working. So until next time, stay curious, stay skeptical, and maybe stop letting multi-billion-dollar brands pretend they're the underdog for a change.